buildings can affect our health, and they can affect our mental health, they can affect our behavior and the decisions we make, how we interact with people, and all of those things. We must be creating safe buildings, but that shouldn't be a goal or a target. That should be an absolute bare minimum. That should be a starting point. And we can and we should aspire to do better than that. We shouldn't just be creating places that are safe for people, but we should be creating places that actually enhance their quality of life, allow them to thrive and allow them to succeed and be their very best version of themselves and live long and healthy, high quality lives.
Welcome to the Felt Experience podcast, where we discuss with some of the world's leaders and advocates how the physical environments of where we live, work and are educated can profoundly impact our physical, psychological and emotional health and well-being. I'm Melissa Henschke, founder and director of Archetypes of Interiority. Welcome to the Felt Experience. In today's episode, we will talk to Ben Channon about designing for mental health, well-being and happiness, and how buildings and urban design can impact how we feel. Ben Channon is an architect, author, TEDx speaker and mental well-being advocate, and is well known in the industry as a thought leader in designing for happiness and well-being. He now works as a director at wellbeing design consultancy Ecust, where he helps clients and design teams to create healthier places and researches how buildings and urban design can impact how we feel. He also offers talks on workplace mental health, productivity, and company culture, sharing his philosophy that happier staff are better staff. Ben developed an interest in design for mental health, well-being, and happiness after suffering with anxiety problems in his mid-20s. This led him to research the relationship between buildings and happiness, which formed the basis of his first book, Happy by Design. Ben's second book, The Happy Design Toolkit, which offers more practical advice on how to create buildings for our mental well-being, was published in March 2022. Ben now speaks on this subject to businesses and universities around the world. In 2017, Ben co-founded the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum, which is focused on improving mental health within the industry. He is also an accredited mindfulness practitioner with the Mindfulness Association. As part of his passion to improve mental health within architecture and beyond, in 2024, Ben founded the Happiness First Method, a workplace training company built around philosophy that happier staff are better staff. Hello, Ben, and welcome to the Felt Experience. How did architecture become your vessel for creating buildings that support people's physical, psychological, and emotional health and well-being?
Well, hi, Melissa. Thanks for having me. So for me, my background is in architecture. So I trained as an architect. It was sort of, from when I was a teenager, really, it's sort of what I always wanted to do. But unfortunately, when I was in my sort of early to mid-20s, was probably about 24, I, like a lot of architects, actually really overworked myself, burned myself out. And I actually went through my own challenges with my mental health, namely mostly around anxiety, actually, just as a result of that burnout. So that naturally kind of led me down a path to become interested in how buildings affect people's mental health, how particularly sort of I was designing homes at the time. So how the design decisions that I was making, the layout of people's homes, the spatial configurations, the sizes, the outdoor space provision, all of these sorts of things, and even the architecture itself, the selection of materials, all of these sorts of things, position of windows. How was that affecting them psychologically? Was that improving their quality of life? Was it having a negative impact on their mental health, on their decision making, and all these sorts of things? And I realized that actually I hadn't ever been taught a lot of that stuff at architecture school. I'd been taught, these kind of rules about proportions and composition. I'd been taught a lot of stuff about the environment and how to select environmentally friendly materials. But actually, I'd never really been taught anything about environmental psychology or the impact of what I was doing kind of on the mental health of the end user. So that's what I became really fascinated in.
And so the neuroscience behind it all, I find fascinating that architects and designers have no idea about. And it's only now that it's becoming this big phenomena.
Yeah, for sure. I think I should caveat it by saying I do think that, the majority of architects out there obviously got into architecture because they want to have a positive impact on people. They want to create places that improve people's lives. So I'm definitely not saying, architects aren't thinking about this stuff, but it's the formal education. It's teaching us the statistics and things that I learned that were really fascinating to me, like about how the way that ceiling heights in prisons can impact how much violence, like the rates of violence in prisons and things like that, and even just small design tweaks using certain materials over other materials and how that can activate our parasympathetic nervous systems. And it's all fascinating stuff, but we just weren't taught about it. So most architects, we're out there trying our best, but we don't necessarily have all the tools at our fingertips that we could be using.
And it's simple things too. Some of it's a few simple tweaks that can make all the difference.
Yeah, definitely. I'm often asked, "Oh, is this more expensive?" Particularly, clients trying to manage the budgets. Of course they are. And I'm asked if it's more expensive, but actually a lot of it, it's more about just thinking about it early in the process. Of course, if you
Mhm.
change things once everything's designed or trying to make changes late in the process, that can be very costly. But actually, if we already have this knowledge and we go into the design process at an early stage, considering all these issues, it doesn't necessarily need to cost any more money at all.
Today, what has been the biggest difference your work has made to people and place? Is there a particular project?
Yeah, I'm very lucky actually where I work at a company called Eckist. So we are specialist health and wellbeing consultants, which is a lovely job title to have because it means I get to kind of work on my passion all day, every day, which is brilliant. And we worked on a real range of projects from kind of residential schemes to office schemes and even kind of bigger, whether it's kind of like government or civic type projects too. So it does mean we get to make a difference across a whole range of typologies, which is really exciting. One that springs to mind that we worked on actually is a residential, a co-living scheme in southeast London, and there was a real focus there on the physical health as well as the mental health, particularly looking at things like the material selection, and even down to things like how are they laundering the bed sheets, making sure that they're not using lots of harsh, nasty chemicals in the way they do that, selecting bed sheets that are all organic cotton, and those sorts of design decisions to just it seems like small things, but actually when we're starting to see feedback from residents in that project. And for example, there's people who said they moved in there, they've had lifelong challenges with asthma and eczema. And now, after a few months there, they've sort of started really clearing up, and just the difference that's made to their quality of life is absolutely enormous. So it is really rewarding when you do start to see just these, so, what seem like relatively small changes having a genuinely positive impact on people's lives.
And so, what would be the materials that you'd be using that is making those difference?
So a big thing for us is thinking about VOCs,
Hmm.
which may or may not be something your listeners are familiar with. So that's volatile organic compounds, and actually a lot of materials that we use today in architecture and interior design still contain these. The good news is that the industry is moving away from these, and they're slowly, for example, you'll see now if you buy almost any tin of paint, decent quality paint, it will probably say on it somewhere low VOC. But this definitely wasn't always the case, and that there's still lots of building materials, even ones that we think maybe are quite healthy, like if we think about sort of plywood and MDF, we think, oh, it's timber, so it's okay. But actually, a lot of these materials they're stuck together using some glues that can often be quite nasty. And a classic VOC we talk about is formaldehyde, which
Hmm.
does appear in lots of these timber glues. So what you think is, oh, let's line our whole building in this beautiful timber, and then what you don't realize is actually it's sort of leaking out all this formaldehyde gas into the space
Hmm.
for quite a long time, often after you've finished actually putting that timber in. Which of course can then be really harmful, obviously to our respiratory health and things like that. So it's certainly thinking about things like that. Then there's the psychological aspect, as I mentioned, too, of material selection. So interestingly, research does tend to find that as we select more natural materials, as I mentioned, it activates that parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of our fight or flight response. So effectively, what that actually does is it lowers our heart rate, lowers our blood pressure, calms people down, and it's quite astounding, really, to see that data and see those results. But there are numerous studies out there now which show that when we put people in rooms with natural materials rather than, say, if they're lined with steel or concrete or things like that, actually we do see genuine sort of physiological reactions, heart rates coming down, as I said. So it's, yeah, that can have a really big impact. We find it, for for example, in schools, when you start using more natural materials in schools, or even, to start bringing nature itself in,
Mm-hmm.
even something as simple as bringing in a vase of flowers or potted
Mm-hmm.
plants or things like that can genuinely start to have impacts then on learning outcomes, on students' memory and recall and things like that. So yeah, it's all absolutely fascinating.
In your work, how do you shift the emphasis from what you mention in your book, Happy by Design, that the construction industry in the 21st century is focused on three things completely unrelated to the experience of buildings: carbon emissions, safety, and profits?
As I said, I do 100% know that there are people in the construction industry. I work with them every day, people who are really focused on creating amazing buildings, amazing experiences, fantastic places for people. So I will just make that clear first. But yeah, I think what I say in the book is that unfortunately, human experience often is maybe the fourth highest priority, right? So, and actually maybe even the fifth highest. If you carbon emissions completely, if we go through them one by one, absolutely massively important one, which we are also always trying to find solutions that cut carbon emissions, that make buildings more sustainable, because at the end of the day, planet health and human health are so inextricably linked that if we can't just neglect one, we can't just say let's focus on people and forget about the planet, because it's that's only going to have a negative impact on human health in the long term anyway. So that is important, but we need to balance it with other things. Obviously, safety too, incredibly important. We must be creating buildings and places that are safe. But for me, that's if it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety is like that bottom segment of the triangle. And yes, we must be creating safe buildings, but that shouldn't be a goal or a target. That should be an absolute bare minimum. That should be
Mm-hmm.
a starting point. And
Mm-hmm.
we can and we should aspire to do better than that. We shouldn't just be creating places that are safe for people, but we should be creating places that actually enhance their quality of life, allow them to thrive, and allow them to succeed and be their very best version of themselves and live long and healthy, high quality lives. So we can aim a bit higher than safety. And often we hear people talk about health and safety. Health and safety really just means safety actually at the moment. So let's be a bit more aspirational. And then profits. I mentioned there's five things. There's profits, but there's also build program. That those are often actually the main two driving forces. I would say probably often the number one and number two priority for many clients. Obviously, particularly more commercial projects. And of course, again, they're important. We know that without if we're not seeing profitable projects that are built on time, then we're all out of a job, right? We all need projects to make money because
Mm-hmm.
money ultimately
Mm-hmm.
then pays our fees, and
Mm-hmm.
we get it. But at the same time, there's a strange, as I said to you earlier, that there can often be a bit of a strange assumption that it's more expensive to create healthier buildings, and therefore we should almost go for kind of the lowest rung of the ladder, try and just build it fast, build it cheap, stack them high.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what we tend to see is when you do focus on quality and when you do create healthier places, those places they then sell for higher amounts, or they command higher lease rates almost across the board, really. And similarly, if you were building your own office, what we'll see then is your staff will be more productive. You will see a lower staff turnover, less absenteeism. So all of this stuff has an enormous return on investment. And for me, it's quite short-sighted to just say, let's look at the short-term profits. We've got to just build it as cheap as possible and sell it quickly. That's not sustainable. And coming back to that thing about carbon and planet health and sustainability in that sense, actually that's a really unsustainable way to think about things, because those low quality buildings, they'll just have to be demolished in
Exactly.
20 or 30 years'
Mm-hmm.
time. We'll have to start again, which is completely unsustainable. We'd be much better,
And there's no profit
a
in
bit
that, is
like,
there?
well, exactly. And we look back. I'm lucky enough to live in a city here in the UK where we still have Roman architecture and Roman remains here, and that they were built sort of a couple of thousand years ago. So we know it can be done. We know we can absolutely build buildings that can stand the test of time and that can still be there in hundreds, if not thousands of years' time. So why aren't we doing it right now? To me, it just doesn't make any sense.
How do you motivate your clients, particularly in the commercial sector, to see the value proposition of supporting their building users' mental health and well-being?
Sort of, as I said, that is a big part of it, because we have to obviously we have to justify it. We have to make the case that if you spend a little bit more money on this, then you will reap the rewards long term. And as I said, a big part of that is often the education piece around the fact that actually it doesn't necessarily have to cost you a huge amount more money. You may need to slightly rethink the way you've traditionally done things. You might need to try a material you haven't tried before. And all of these things involve a level of risk. And, particularly in the commercial sector, developers don't always want to take risks, or they like to stick to the way we've always done things. But ultimately, that's not how we make progress, right? And that's not how we're going to create a better world for people. So as I said, a big part of what we do, it is about that education piece. It's about communicating to people that in the first place, buildings can affect our health and they can affect our mental health. They can affect our behavior and the decisions we make, how we interact with people, and all of those things that we've already talked about. But B, that it is something that is worth doing. It's something that is not just going to make you, there's not just the ethically right thing to do, but actually there's a financial case to it. And often, actually, a big part of the reason we're seeing developers do it now is actually for almost that kind of brand image sort of thing. We're seeing a huge rise in funders, for example, saying we will only now fund quote unquote ethical projects. We will only fund projects that have good ESG credentials, that are thinking about the environment, thinking about people, and making sure they're measuring and recording and reporting these things, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's about often making that case to developers and to businesses. Listen, you don't want to get a reputation as creating buildings that are not supporting the people who use them, that you don't want to be creating unhealthy buildings. There've been so many scandals over recent years of whether it's businesses. I'm trying to think of examples, but businesses putting unhealthy things in their foods or in various products, and actually housing developers or office commercial developers don't want to be seen to be doing the same thing and don't want to be getting themselves in trouble in a few years' time with, particularly, they could end up creating a lot of building stock here, right, that people just don't want to use in 10, 15 years' time because they realize it's just not good for their health. And the general public is becoming so much more educated on this all the time, particularly off the back of the COVID-19 pandemic, where now people suddenly, we were forced to spend so much time in our own homes. We really did have to evaluate the impact they were having on our mental health. And we started to realize, oh, my friend's got a home which I would much rather be in lockdown in than in my own home. And we started to see what good looks like and what maybe less good looks like.
How are you incorporating a positive impact on human behavior in the physical environments you create?
So for us, this is really all about this concept of nudge psychology, which you may have come across. The idea that we can effectively kind of gently nudge people in the direction of making good, healthy decisions. So a really good example actually is if we let's look at exercise and movement. That's a really easy one to talk about. So for example, if we look at trying to encourage people to take the stairs rather than take the lifts, we know that actually it can be quite challenging. People typically, they really will want to take the lift or the elevator generally, unless it is kind of much easier for them to take the stairs, or unless the stairs are particularly enjoyable, pleasant, attractive to use. So for us, we look at that and say, well, how can we encourage people to get a few more steps in every day? Well, let's put the stairs physically ahead of the lifts. Let's make them visually ahead of the lifts as well. So you see them first, you reach them first, and let's make them really high quality to use as well. So bringing in some of those ideas I've already mentioned about, let's make them full of daylight. Maybe let's integrate some nature or some artwork into there, some natural materials, and even in the way that we're looking at operation of buildings as well now. Can we sort of explore gamification? So can you say to different teams in the office, okay, we're going to have a kind of step counter competition throughout this month, and whichever team does the most steps, maybe they get a small reward at the end of the month, or we make a donation to a charity of their choice or something like that. So all these little things we could do to kind of try and nudge people to be more active. And of course, that translates to so many different things. Where do we put the bike stores? Do you see the gym on the way out of your office, or is it hidden away somewhere? And then right through to, we can look at social interaction too. Actually, that's another really good example, because particularly we know that isolation and loneliness are really, really bad for our health. They're actually shown to have a negative impact on our life expectancy, on our quality of life. Even things like our dietary choices get worse as we get lonelier and more isolated. So we as designers have to be doing absolutely anything we can to encourage people to interact more. And this can be, it can be really small things. So in offices, for example, actually I've seen a few offices now, it did become the trend for a while to put in loads of different tea points. So everyone's got a tea point really close to them. But what we realized is actually this is almost siloing people. So you just get a group of people around one tea point, group of people around another one. Instead, actually, what if we remove all of those and just put one central tea point? That means you end up meeting everybody from all four corners of the office. You have way more interactions. You interact with a much wider range of people. And it's just a really small design change that actually, again, could encourage you just to get more steps as well if you have to walk slightly further to grab a coffee. So,
and
those sorts of things.
Connection.
Really, yeah, exactly.
And belonging and all of those fundamental
absolutely.
people.
And one of my favorite residential buildings that does this very well actually is a sort of older people's later living scheme here in the UK, where they actually kind of really flip traditional typology, where normally in these projects the central circulation corridor is like buried right in the heart of the scheme. So there's kind of no daylight. It tends to be like 1,500 mil wide, pretty uninspiring, dark corridor. But actually what they said was, okay, let's move it to the outside of the building. Let's make all the homes dual aspect, bring loads of light in on both sides. The corridor was pretty much open on one side with just lots of glazing along it. And they actually made it much wider. And there's these kind of niches in it where they've got lovely coffee tables. So now all of the residents could sit outside their home at this coffee table, and as neighbors walk by, oh, sit down, let's play a game of cards, or let's have a catch up, whatever you end up doing. And it's just, again, a really powerful way to easily make a scheme 5 times, 10 times, whatever it is, more sociable and encourage that social interaction, which we know can not just improve people's quality of life, but actually even extend the length of their life.
What's next for Ben Channon?
Good question. Well, my wife has told me fairly explicitly that I'm not allowed to write any more books for a little while. So I'm definitely taking a pause from writing too many books. But for me, as I said, it's really about this education piece, I think, and trying to continue working on just getting more people on board this way of thinking, because we are still quite a long way behind, say, the environmental sustainability movement. I think we're probably now, in terms of health and well-being, we're maybe where environmental sustainability was in maybe the late 90s or the early noughties. People are starting to get it. They're starting to understand it. A lot of people are still confused when I tell them what my job title is, and the fact, what do you mean there's someone out there who your job is to make buildings healthier? That seems strange to people.
Yes.
And a a lot of people don't really
I get
realize.
that too.
Yes, well,
what? You do that? You sound a bit crazy.
A healthy or an unhealthy building. So a lot of people still don't really understand that buildings can be positive or negative for our health. So there is a massive education piece out there, and I want to continue working on that. And that means more public speaking. It means writing more articles and just trying to get the word out there. But fundamentally, I think we are not going to be able to do what we do indefinitely unless more people start to understand about this subject, because we need to be creating that demand for it. We need to get to that position, as I said, where the general public is really crying out for healthier buildings, because they absolutely should be. And as I said, I think if people knew some of the negative impacts that buildings have on us, there would be outroar about it. Uproar, that's the word I was looking for. Sorry, it's 8:30 in the morning here in the UK, so I clearly need another coffee. There would be uproar about it. Yeah. So I think that education is definitely my main focus for the next year or two at least.
The conversations, that's the biggest thing. The conversations, the advocacy, the education, and making it happen at high levels.
Exactly. Absolutely, yes, 100%. Getting buy-in from those senior people is, of course, absolutely fundamental. But I do still think it's the real root cause, or the way we're going to drive this forward is with the public. Again, if at the end of the day, if consumers want this, and if consumers are demanding this, then developers and companies are going to have no choice but to give it to them.
Well, Happy by Design is Ben Channon's book. I'm holding it up, but if you're listening anyway, it's Happy by Design. Ben Channon, you've been a joy. Thank you for being on the Felt Experience. And let's get this
Thank you so much, Melissa.
as far and as wide as we possibly can to educate everyone on this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take it easy. I hope you've enjoyed the latest episode of the Felt Experience. I'm Melissa Henschke, your host. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave any queries, questions you may have on the various platforms you've tuned in through. We look forward to seeing you next time.